So, who's really more powerful, the president of the United States or the president of Russia? It seems like a pretty straightforward question, right? Well, the answer is way more complex than you might think. Let's dive in and really unpack this. Okay, let's rewind a bit to 2016. Forbes magazine drops its list of the world's most powerful people, and they make a pretty bold statement. Vladimir Putin is number one. And who's in second place? The president-elect at the time, Donald Trump. Their whole argument was that Putin operates, unconstrained by conventional global norms. Basically, he just gets what he wants. Now, that ranking kicked off a huge debate. Because really, can you measure power on just one ladder? Is the person who can bend the world to their will the same as the person who commands the world's most powerful country? It turns out it's just not that simple. To really get our heads around this, we need a better way to look at it. We're not talking about one ladder of power. We're talking about two completely different scales. And this is the key to cracking the whole question. It really just boils down to two types of power. On one hand, you've got state power. Think of this as the power of the flag. It's the raw strength of the country itself, its economic muscle, its military might, its web of allies. And then, on the other hand, there's personal power. Let's call that the power of the throne. This is all about the leader's personal grip on their own system, their ability to act with few, if any, real constraints. All right, let's start with state power, the power of the flag. And on this scale, well, the comparison isn't even close. First off, let's talk money. The U.S. economy is just an absolute juggernaut, with a GDP north of $30 trillion. It's diverse, it's innovative, and it's the bedrock of the entire global financial system. Russia's economy, it's a huge energy player for sure, but in nominal terms, it's about a 15th of that size. The gap is just massive. And then you look at the military. The U.S. defense budget is a staggering $832 billion. That's not just more than Russia, it's more than the next 10 countries combined. That kind of money buys you a global network of bases, bleeding-edge technology, and the ability to project power literally anywhere on the planet. But state power goes way beyond just dollars and weapons. The U.S. sits at the very center of the global system. The dollar is the world's reserve currency, which gives America incredible financial leverage through things like the SWIFT system. It leads NATO, the world's biggest military alliance, and its dominance in tech and media gives it a cultural reach that no other country can touch. So okay, on state power, the U.S. has a massive lead, no question. But now, let's switch over to our second scale, personal power. Because this is where the entire picture flips on its head. You see, a U.S. president, it doesn't matter who they are, is hemmed in. They've got checks and balances from Congress, from the courts, from a free press. To get anything big done, they have to negotiate, build coalitions, and, they have to face the voters every few years. In Russia, the system is fundamentally different. Power is concentrated in what they call the vertical of power. The media is largely state-controlled, political opposition is severely limited, and the constitution's been changed to allow a president to stay in power pretty much indefinitely. One of our sources, the infographics show, puts it really bluntly. They say that within the Russian system, the president's power is, for all practical purposes, absolute. That right there is the core of personal power, the almost complete lack of meaningful constraints on a leader. So how does this actually play out in the real world? Well, it all comes down to speed and freedom of action. The Russian president can make these enormous decisions, like annexing territory or weaponizing energy supplies, with incredible speed, because there are very few people inside the system who can stop them. A U.S. president, on the other hand, might command more powerful tools, but actually using them often requires a much slower, more complicated process of getting everyone on board. Okay, so we've looked at two very different kinds of power, and it seems like each leader has a huge advantage in one of them. Let's bring it all together for the final verdict. So here's the bottom line. It's a split decision. When you're talking about state power, the sheer might of the nation's economy, military, and alliances, the advantage, and it's a big one, goes to the U.S. president. But when you switch to personal power, a leader's internal control and their freedom to act without constraints, the advantage clearly shifts to the Russian president. And that brings us right back to our original question. Who is more powerful? The answer isn't really a who, it's a what. It depends entirely on which kind of power you think matters more. At the end of the day, that's the real conflict here. It's the immense systemic power of the flag versus the concentrated, decisive power of the throne.
One is about the strength of the entire system. The other is about the strength of one person's grip on that system.
And that leaves us with a final question, something for you to think about. In the world we live in today, which of these two forms of power is ultimately more consequential? Is it the deep structural might of a nation that lasts for generations? Or is it the ability of a single leader to act decisively right here, right now? Which one do you think truly shapes our world?